Hello, I am Dave Ackmann, and I want to welcome you to this series of videos on the creation of billboards and posters for model railroads. My railroad is the Baden, Vogt, and DeSmet, the names of the elementary schools I attended back in the 1950s. Like many railroads, I have a small carnival, but one day I decided the circus should come to town. I wanted circus billboards. I went looking for them on the web, but found nothing that met my needs. But I did find many circus images, just not billboards, so I decided to make them myself. One thing led to another, and I created over 100 billboards for various products and industries that I remember while growing up. Now my goal is to share with you the techniques I have uncovered to create unique billboards which complement the industries on your layout and the products they produce. To meet this goal, I will demonstrate how to search for, organize, and save vintage billboards and poster images, how to size and print decals for billboards you have saved, how to build supporting structures to display your decals, and how to build fixtures to help build the structures. In order to complete your billboards, you will need access to several items: a personal computer running Microsoft Windows and a high-speed internet connection, an inkjet printer. I use a Canon MG2520 available for about $75. Decal paper. I use white water-slide decal transfer paper at about $18 per 20 sheets. A styrene chopper 3 from Northwest Short Lines, about $42, or its equivalent. Digital or dial calipers, a height gauge like a Wixie WR200 or equivalent, brass set-up gauge blocks, a ruler in HO scale, and various pieces of evergreen styrene. A plank of 48-inch 3/4-inch ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, pieces of brass rod, MDF, corian, or other dimensionally stable material, and 3x5 index cards. Throughout these tutorials, we will provide dimensions for creating billboards for images between 8 and 16 feet tall in HO scale. However, the techniques are applicable to larger and smaller scales. My interest in billboards began when I decided my layout needed billboards to publish the arrival of a circus into town. First, I decided to visit the Walters website and search for ready-made billboards, and I found over 70 options in HO. But of these, over 50 were from Tichy, and I felt they were rather plain, and none featured a circus. Walters themselves offered some pre-made support structures that matched the artwork appearing in their annual catalog, and although I did like them, there was little variety in the artwork, and there was no way to have billboards at any dimension other than the one they offered. I then searched YouTube and found one good site that showed how to construct custom billboards from styrene, and I liked his approach. You can find it yourself if you search for Luke Towan billboard. But finally, I decided that if I was to get my circus billboards, I would have to build them from scratch. But where could I find the circus billboard artwork that I remembered? As a retired computer scientist, I decided to do a search on the internet. I typically use Firefox as a browser and Yahoo for searches. I did a search on Vintage Images Circus, and I hit the mother lode. At the very top was a link to a site featuring circus images, so I clicked on it. I scrolled to the top and saw the first of many images, one of which was enlarged. The enlarged image was not particularly useful to me, but then I started paging downward. Quickly I found an image that met my needs, so I clicked on it. An enlargement appeared, which also gave the dimensions of the image in pixels. I decided to save the image to my hard drive. I right-clicked on the image and a menu popped up. One of the options was to save image as. I clicked on this option and a file save window opened. I decided to create a folder for all my future circus images, so I clicked on the New Folder button in the upper left, navigated to a place I liked, named the folder Circus, then double-clicked on it to open it. I then gave the image a name and clicked on Save. This completed the capture of the image on my hard drive to use as I desired. I continued scrolling down until I reached the end of the page, where a Show More Images button appeared. I clicked on it, and more images appeared. When I found something new I liked, I right-clicked on it and saved it. This continued until I had enough. I ended up with 35 images suitable for billboards or posters. I was very pleased. But this was just the beginning. I realized that I could combine vintage images with any broad topic for which I wanted a billboard. Cars, soft drinks, groceries, tobacco, anything that stirred my mind could be memorialized into a billboard. I subsequently searched vintage billboard instead of vintage images and found even more. The fun never ends. Before saving an image, I always take a look at the size of the image at the right side. I ask myself, how tall will the intended billboard be? If the image has less than 100 pixels of vertical size for each inch of intended height, then it might not have enough resolution to avoid a choppy or pixelated image, and I should consider a different one to avoid disappointment. In other words, if an image has less than 200 pixels of height, it may be considered for a short wall poster, but not a billboard. I did discover that some of the images were copyrighted, but I believe that if used on my personal railroad for educational purposes, then the fair use doctrine of copyright law allows me to use them. Also, as the use is very limited, I believe the de minimis doctrine, in which the law does not concern itself with trifles, applies. I certainly would not sell any images I captured, but I believe that I am free to use them on my model train layout. If you have further concern, of course, consult your own counsel. Other images have watermarks imposed on them to protect them from unpaid use, and I tend to avoid them. Here you can see watermarks on a circus image and what it can look like if you have the skills to edit a photo. It's a lot of work. Some other thoughts. You know I encourage the use of folders to hold similar images. If you would like some free software to print all the images in a folder, complete with their file names, I would recommend Image Viewer from http://www.faststone.org. It has a nice way of putting multiple images on a single page in a thumbnail format and is quite useful. Also, while I used Firefox and Yahoo, other browsers and search engines will also work. I tested Microsoft Edge and the Google search engine, and they worked as well. Your choice. Now that we have captured images, how do we turn them into decals or printouts for our billboards? Making decals is easy if you have a good inkjet printer. All you need is special decal paper and some software to scale the images. First, the paper. Decal paper is available at some hobby shops and online. I prefer to buy my decal paper from Amazon, as it is less expensive, less than $1 per A4 size sheet, and is delivered directly to my door. Search Amazon for Water Slide Decal Transfer Paper White, and it should pop right up. I like the brand from Rollurius. Their sample image is the one with the purple background. Rollurius also makes a clear decal transfer paper, but get the one with the white background. That's why we put white in our search bar. Clear transfer paper might be our choice for numbering rolling stock, but not for posters and billboards. If you have PowerPoint on your PC, you can use it to import, size, and print your images. If not, consider downloading LibreOffice at www.libreoffice.org. LibreOffice includes a useful presentation program similar to PowerPoint. Click the Download button to download the software and save the MSI file. Then double-click on the downloaded file and follow the installation instructions. Whether you use PowerPoint or LibreOffice, the tasks we need to make the images printer-ready are the same: importing and sizing. I will show how to use both tools. Now, on to importing and scaling with PowerPoint. Our goal is to download and size about a dozen images on a single page. We do so because decal paper is not inexpensive, so we might as well get as much out of a sheet as we can. To import our accumulated images, we open a new blank presentation, then click on the border around the Click to Add title box, and then click on the keyboard's Delete key to remove it. Similarly, we click on the Click to Add subtitle box's border and then hit the Delete key to remove it. Now, to import an image, we click on the Insert tab and then on the picture icon. A menu window opens and we scroll to select the folder where we placed our images. We then select an image of interest and then the Insert button. The image will appear within PowerPoint. To resize the image, we right-click on the image and then select Size and Position. Next, we make sure that the Lock Aspect Ratio box is checked. We enter in the desired height. I hope that you do remember that an 8-foot tall billboard translates into 1.10 scale inches, and so forth. And then click on the Close button. We repeat this process to add more images until our page is full. If you do not have PowerPoint, LibreOffice, as described earlier, can do the same task for free. Start LibreOffice and click on the Impress Presentation button on the left. The Select a Template window will open, and since we do not want a template, we cancel the window. Now, on the right side, in the Properties column, please make sure that the slide format is A4, which is the size of the decal film, and select the first available layout, the blank one in the upper left of the available layouts. To insert our images, we click on the Insert menu item and then on Image. Just like in PowerPoint, a menu window opens and we scroll to select the folder where we placed our images. We then select an image of interest and then click on the Open button, a slight difference from PowerPoint where this button is labeled Insert. Now, right-click on the image and select Position and Size. We make sure that the Keep Ratio box is checked, enter in the desired height, and then the OK button. We repeat this process to add more images until our page is full. Printing the decals is easy. Just place your decal paper properly in your printer and do a file print. When the page completes printing, Be careful to avoid touching the printed area and allow the ink to dry at least 2 hours. Once the page is dry, remember that inkjet printers use water-soluble ink, and if we tried to use the decals without water protection, we would not be pleased. To correct the issue, go to your automotive paint store and buy a rattle can of clear spray lacquer and coat the image. My decal paper says to coat the images within 24 hours of printing, but be sure to read and follow the manufacturer's directions, both for the decal paper and the lacquer. I generally give the decals a second coat of lacquer and allow 24 hours for final drying. If you feel uncomfortable making decals, it is perfectly acceptable to print on cardstock paper, which is about as thick as an index card, and apply the card to the support structure with rubber cement. It may not be as bright or glossy, but it can work. Making the support structure for billboards involves building 3 assemblies: the face and frame, the legs, and the boardwalk. Making the decals was pretty easy, but this part is a bit harder, so be patient. Let's start with the face and frame. I like to put a frame around every piece of billboard art. To make a face frame, cut out the decal you wish to use. Also, cut 2 pieces of evergreen 8210 about 4 inches long. Lay the decal on a cutting surface with the 2 pieces of 8210 on the top. This is the height of the face frame you need to hold both the decal and the frame. Lay a straight edge on the top and scribe a straight line, or a half a dozen lines, across a piece of evergreen 9040 and snap it off. Similarly, place the 2 pieces of evergreen 8210 on the side of the decal. This marks the length of evergreen 9040 needed to contain the decal and the frame. Using a straight edge, scribe a line and snap it off. You could use evergreen 9030 and even 9020, which are progressively thinner and less expensive, but I appreciate the additional heft and am willing to pay the price. Your decision. Now it is time to build the frame, and we will use a chopper razor blade type cutter or equivalent and some more evergreen number 8210 strips to cut out our parts. Since we just cut the face, I recommend that we place the top of the face frame in the chopper and bring up a stop to set the size of the cut. I cut pieces of brass to serve as stops for right angle cuts, as they are smaller than the triangular stops from Northwest Shortline and easier to use. Cut 2 pieces to become the top and bottom of the frame, and 3 more to be used eventually for the boardwalk. While you are at it, cut 4 pieces of evergreen 8206 for eventual use as back stiffeners. Similarly, rotate the face and cut 2 pieces of 8210 to frame the left and right sides. Set aside 3 pieces of 8210 and all 4 pieces of 8206. Now, miter the remaining 4 pieces of 8210 at 45 degrees, being careful not to snip off too much of the length. Glue the left frame piece to the face, then the top and bottom, and finally the right frame piece. Test fit the decal into the frame and trim if needed. I usually use Plastruct plastic weld or Plastruct Bondene glue, but other fast-drying, brush-applied glues will work. Plastic weld has a bit more working time and totally cures in 24 hours, and Bondene sets up faster and cures faster. You don't need to be ultra careful with the gluing, as painting will cover a lot of sins. Now, flip the face frame assembly face down, and let's glue some stiffeners to the back for visual interest. In the previous step, we cut 4 pieces of evergreen 8206, but something larger or smaller could be substituted. I spaced them evenly, parallel to the long side of the frame. Now let's go to the boardwalk. Earlier we cut 3 pieces of evergreen 8210 for this purpose. I used a small fixture to line the 3 pieces parallel, apply some masking tape over all 3 of them, and then use the tape to remove the strips from the fixture. Every inch or so, I glue some Evergreen 8104 crosswise to brace the main pieces. I then remove the tape and allow the assembly to dry. Once dry, I nip off any excess length of the cross braces. Finally, we need to create several supports to hold the frame and boardwalk. Our supports will have 4 parts: a vertical leg, a slanted leg, a cross member, and a diagonal support, all constructed from Evergreen 164. Here you may want to diverge from my suggestions. Evergreen 164 is approximately 8 by 8 inches in HO scale, and you may feel that such a piece is a bit larger than prototypical. The billboard frames from Walthers are indeed a bit thinner. But for my eye and fat fingers, 164 is more pleasing and easier to work with. Again, your decision. If you end up wanting to make a lot of signs, you may want to order Evergreen 164 in bulk as part number 6164 directly from the manufacturer at http://evergreenscalemodels.com. They're good folks. To assemble the supports, I created a leg assembly fixture out of ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, or UHMW for short. UHMW is a very slippery plastic and little sticks to it well, thus making it ideal for an assembly fixture since our glue or glued parts won't stick easily. Yes, you could make an assembly fixture from some other material, but UHMW is ideal, easily obtainable, and well worth it. I will describe how to make this fixture in the final part of this tutorial, but for now, note that I will be using one fixture to glue the vertical and slanted legs at a 30-degree angle, and will then glue the legs to the cross members at a 90-degree angle to the vertical leg, rendering it a horizontal support for the boardwalk. Finally, I will glue the diagonal supports at 60 degrees. Why 30 and 60 degrees? Because I can cut these angles easily on the chopper and they look good. Walthers uses these angles for their billboards, so if it is good enough for them, it is good enough for me. So now it is time to cut the legs, but how long? This depends on the height of your artwork and how tall you wish the billboard to be above the ground. Let's assume that the artwork we are using is 8 foot tall. I like to add a frame around the artwork, so that adds another foot above and below the artwork. We are assuming that the legs are 8 foot long, and we also want a toe gap between the face frame and the boardwalk. Adding it all up, it comes to 19 feet for the length of the billboard's front legs. Let's convert 19 feet into inches, and we get 228. Dividing 228 by the HO scale factor of 87.1, that tells us that our front legs should be 2.62 inches long. If you want to use a different height of artwork, or taller or shorter legs, change the numbers and do the math. How many leg sets? I tend to take the width of the face frame assembly, round it up to the next higher whole number, and cut that many leg sets. Thus, if the face frame assembly is between 3 and 4 inches, I use 4 leg sets. If it is between 2 and 3, I use 3 sets. But how long should the diagonal leg be? And you thought you would never use your high school trigonometry. The ratio of the adjacent side to the hypotenuse of a 30-degree angle of a 30-60-90 triangle is the cosine of 30 degrees, or 0.866. Thus, the diagonal for the support will be the length of the vertical leg divided by 0.866, or 3.02 inches. If you decide to make your legs shorter or longer, alter them accordingly. Now that we know how long the leg should be, we can cut some styrene, right? Not so fast. If you think you might ever want to create another billboard to these dimensions, stop and make a gauge block. What is a gauge block? It is a piece of dimensionally stable material such as brass, UHMW, or corian, cut to the exact length of the desired part. The gauge block is then used to set the distance of a chopper's blade to its stop block. You never again have to try to measure the distance to place the stop block from the blade. You just place the gauge block on the chopper, slide the stop block over, and forget about it. So, rough cut a piece of material. I use 3mm square brass rod, a bit over length, and gently file or sand off the end until it is the proper length. Make a gauge block for both the vertical leg, the sloped leg, the cross member, and the diagonal support. If you plan on making more billboards than just one size, make a set of gauge blocks for each size. Yes, it's work. Just do it. You can thank me later. Now, using the gauge block, cut the vertical leg to size. Using the sloped gauge block, cut a sloped leg to about 1/4 inch over size, miter one end, and then cut the other end to size with a 90-degree cut. The sloped end will not be perfectly flat to the ground, and that never bothered me. But if it bothers you, chop off the angle with your hobby knife. The result will be a perfectly vertical billboard, which after final assembly may be a bit unstable on your layout. You may want to nip off 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch from the sloped leg to make it more stable. Initially, I wanted a vertical board, but more recently have gone for something more stable. Be advised. Now let's glue the two legs together. I first place a dab of glue on the mitered edge of the sloped piece and place it in the fixture. Then I place a dab of glue on the end of the vertical piece and place it into the fixture, such that the top of each piece meet at the top of the fixture. The slots in the fixture are about 1/100 of an inch wider than the styrene, so I carefully wedge my hobby knife blade between the outside edge of the legs and the fixture, so that the legs have a good close fit, and I wait 15 to 20 seconds for the joint to set. I then put the point of my hobby knife under the joint and pop it out of the fixture and set it aside to cure, which takes about 2 to 24 hours. Don't rush the cure time. While waiting for the two legs to cure, cut the cross member. The length of the cross member will be a function of the height of the face frame assembly. The taller the sign, the longer the cross member. I'll spare you the trigonometry, but my fixtures require that the cross member be 1.42, 1.62, 1.75, 1.93, and 2.06 inches respectively for 8, 10, 12, 14, and 16-foot high billboards. These lengths are not critical, so feel free to cut these a bit longer if you like. Using a gauge block to set the length, cut some evergreen 1/64 styrene about 1/4 inch longer than recommended, miter a 60-degree angle, and cut it to the recommended length. Similarly, use your gauge block to set up the cut for the diagonal cross brace, 0.86 inches, 1.10, 1.25, 1.42, and 1.62 inches. Cut oversize, cut a 60-degree angle, square off the end to the proper length. No approximations here. Now that the two legs have cured, place the cross member in the fixture, making sure that the angled end is facing properly in the proper slot of the fixture. For an 8-foot face frame, use the shortest slot. For a 16-foot face frame, use the longest slot. You will notice that the cross member slots are deeper than the leg slots. This is so that after placing the cross member in the fixture, you can apply a dab of glue where the cross member intersects the legs, then reinsert the legs into the fixture and press the pieces together, and the fixture will hold all three pieces in place. Wait 15 to 20 seconds for the pieces to bond, and then use a hobby knife to pry the pieces from the fixture. Wait a few hours for these pieces to cure. Before gluing the diagonal support, note that the square cut end of the diagonal brace will attach to the sloped leg and the mitered end to the vertical leg, so rotate the diagonal support until they fit. The diagonal support is in the same plane as the two legs, so don't try to glue it to the cross member. It might help to put the three-piece assembly on a piece of glass, legs on the flat surface and cross member above, then slide the glued ends of the diagonal support in place. Now, rough cut, miter, and final cut the diagonal support and glue it into place. Wait overnight for the assembly to cure. Once the new day dawns, make sure the area where the sloped leg meets the cross member and the diagonal support is flat. If not, take a file or sandpaper and flatten it. Now it is time to attach the legs to the face frame. Don't try to attach the legs to the frame assembly without first placing a piece of ultra-high molecular weight or even wood on your tabletop, so that the cross member, the thing that will eventually hold the boardwalk, has some place to drape while gluing the legs. I like to place the legs about an inch apart. Take your time with them, but faster setting glue like Plastruct Bonding might make it easier than longer setting glue. Do your best to keep the legs perpendicular to the frame assembly. Short, inch-wide pieces of UHMW between the legs will make this easier. The legs will start to set in 15 to 60 seconds, but if you can, give the joint 15 minutes or so before gluing the next leg to give the joint some brief time to set up. Alternately, and while not absolutely essential, I made an assembly fixture to assist in this task, and it helped a lot. Before gluing the boardwalk, place the face frame into the large slot of the fixture, face down. Line it up so the legs are equally spaced across the long side of the face frame, and that the top of the face frame is aligned with the top of the leg assembly. Take a leg assembly and glue the top part with plastic weld. Insert the cross member into the hole between the two pieces of the fixture and press the top part of the leg into the sign and the bottom part into the long slot. Hold for 20 seconds and go on to the next leg set. Once all the legs are attached, cut a piece of evergreen 144, wide enough to span all the legs, and glue it to the sloped legs at the intersection of all the joints to serve as a brace for all the legs. Once dry, trim off the excess. Set the assembly on its legs and glue the boardwalk to the cross member. If desired, trim the legs to make a shorter sign. A straight edge might be useful to minimize the sign's wobble. Paint the entire structure. Since glue does not adhere well to a painted surface, make sure all parts are firmly attached before painting. I prefer flat colors over glossy, and I often try to make the colors of the structure complementary to the colors in the decal. Spray paints worked for me, and I always give 2 coats to both the front and back. Apply the decal. My experience is that about 20 seconds in the water is all it takes to loosen the decal from the backing paper. Once dry, and if desired, spray the whole thing with dull coat. Place the sign on your layout and enjoy. Throughout the last section on making support structures, we made extensive use of assembly fixtures. But where did they come from? The short answer is, I made them. Today we don't have time to cover just how that is done, but there is another resource. I have a website at http://dackm.github.io, and toward the bottom of the site there is a section which contains pointers to all the videos we have seen today, plus a 16-minute section on how I made the fixtures. I have an extensive wood shop in my basement, with tools like a table saw and router table with a router lift, and these tools were necessary to make the fixtures. If you don't have such large bench tools, perhaps a makerspace in your area does, or maybe someone in your train club who is also into woodworking could help you in their shop. But always remember that such tools are dangerous and your safety is your responsibility. If you lack experience or training, ask for help. The material I used in the fixtures is ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, or UHMW for short, because it is so slippery and glue doesn't stick to my fixtures during assembly. UHMW is available from woodworking stores such as Rockler and Woodcraft, and even plastic supply merchants in large cities, but I prefer to buy mine from Peachtree Supply at http://www.ptreeusa.com. Why? Because their UHMW pieces seem to have finer grain and are easier to machine. I use 3/32 and 1/8 inch carbide router bits to machine the material, but even smaller bits would be required if you want billboards for something smaller than HO. A digital height gauge and brass setup blocks are also almost indispensable. In a nutshell, the leg alignment fixture is a piece of 4" by 3/4 inch UHMW, 4 1/4 inches long, on which I located the center and cut a 60-degree angle. I routed 3/32 inch slots along the two longer sides. I very carefully cut off the top point and routed slots perpendicular to the middle length side. The slots were at different locations to be used for different sized signs. The fixture for the boardwalk can be made from just about any thickness of UHMW, 1 3/8 by 6 inches. I routed slots 0.15 of an inch apart and extremely shallow, using a 1/8 inch bit. The final assembly fixture is made from a piece of 5.5 inch UHMW cut lengthwise, 1 3/8 inch from the long side. The larger piece is thinned down from 3/4 inch to 0.59 inches using a large router bit, leaving short wings at either end. The smaller piece has 3/32 inch slots cut in the short side and again on the long side, with the long side slots being offset 3/32 inch from the short sides. The pieces are then glued together with contact cement. There are more details to constructing the fixtures in its video. The techniques and fixtures you have just seen are all well and good, but creating the assembly fixtures is challenging. That's why I send a set to each division where I teach this clinic virtually, so check with this clinic sponsor to borrow a set. But in 2020, I got started with 3D printing, and it changed my modeling life. If you have any interest in getting into 3D printing, hold on to your hat. It is true that printing something with a 3D printer requires designing an object with computer-aided design software, aka CAD, and learning and using such a tool can be brutally difficult. But I have degrees in mechanical engineering and, more importantly, in computer science, and I had an idea. What if I could create a program wherein a user could enter design parameters for an object they wanted into a form? And what if the program would then design the model for them, ready to print on a 3D printer? And so I created such a program and called it a generator. Since 2022, I have created over a dozen generators for different structural components, like walls, windows, and roofing. And in the autumn of 2024, I created a generator for billboards. You just fill out a form, press the green button, and out comes a model file. The generator for billboards actually creates 4 different components: the face frame, the legs, the boardwalk, and an assembly fixture. You just enter parameters for your desired billboard and then select which component you want to create, kind of like ordering from Amazon. The generator then creates the necessary geometrical instructions to draw your part in a language called SCAD. But we cannot 3D print an SCAD file. It's the function of the OpenSCAD program to translate the geometrical description of the model into a stereolithography or STL file, suitable for printing. OpenSCAD is available for free at http://www.openscad.org. After downloading and launching OpenSCAD, we import the file created in the generator by clicking on File, Open File, and selecting the SCAD file we just created. For example, let's import a billboard leg set. If we like how it looks, we will do a design render, or hit the F6 key as a shortcut, and save the model as a stereolithography file suitable for printing. If we don't like the looks, we go back to the generator and modify our design. The assembly fixture is particularly interesting. It functions just like the one I demonstrated for constructing with styrene. Slip the horizontal part of each leg into the slot, slide the face frame underneath, and glue. But since the assembly fixture is made with something other than slippery ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, be careful not to glue the pieces to the fixture. Print one yourself and you won't need to bug your sponsor to send you the UHMW fixtures. Please note that while I used imperial units, inches and feet, when I made billboards from styrene, for my generators I have converted to metric. It helps to remember that HO scale is 3.5 millimeters to the foot and N scale is 1.90 millimeters to the foot. We now need to send the file to our 3D printer for printing. How this is done differs markedly based on the printer we are using. You may have bought your own printer, be using one owned by a friend, using one in a makerspace or library, or sent it off to a service bureau for them to print and send it back to you. Regardless of how you print it, you will need to follow the manufacturer's instructions. For me, printing starts when I start a piece of software that came with the printer called a slicer. The function of a slicer is to translate the generic STL file into specific instructions for your brand of 3D printer. So I import one or more STL files, and when I want multiple copies of an object like multiple billboard legs, duplicating them with a Windows copy and paste function, and then slice it and print it. My printer is connected to my PC wirelessly, but yours may require you to direct the output to a micro SD card, insert the card manually in your printer, and start the printing from a control panel. All slicing software is different, so take what you have just seen as representative, not as gospel. I know that you want me to recommend a printer for you to buy, but I'm not going to do that. I will tell you that I now use a Bamboo P1S printer, which I dearly love, and in January 2025, it is available at Micro Center for $600. I paid about $900 for mine because I purchased it with a $300 option, which lets me print in multiple colors. But you can get into the 3D printing game for about $300. Just remember what old Dave is about to tell you. Buy your last tools first. This is the third 3D printer I have purchased because the earlier ones were inexpensive but problematic. I am not going to recommend you go with either a filament or resin printer, only to tell you that I dearly love the Bamboo P1S. For advice, talk to your friends and perhaps a Micro Center store near you. I did get carried away once, made the thickness of the billboard's face frame 0, and added a dozen or so back stiffeners to create a slatted billboard. The generator is just so versatile, but that teaser will be left for another day. My generator software is not limited to billboards. I have written generators for a variety of structural components, including basic four-walled buildings, windows, roofing, and many more. They are all free for your use by visiting my website at http://dackm.github.io, downloading a zip file and extracting what you wish to use. I use virus protection software, but do your own scan just to be sure that they are virus-free. Don't blame me if you skip this step and bypass safe computing practices. I continue to create more generators for other structural components and enhance older versions as the need arises. In 2025, my focus is more on documenting the use of what I have already created. But when an idea comes to me in the middle of the night, well, sometimes I am distracted by the idea and stop documenting for a while and create something new. For me, programming is more seductive than documentation. So there you have it. If you have any questions after the presentation, I can be reached at ackmanns@charter.net. And don't forget the website. Now let's open things up for questions.